Welcome to the AutoFire Power Hour. This is another installment in our illustrious Quick Hits series. The topic today is going to be pitched to us by our special guest, Robert Bear. So without any furthers, what are we here to quick hit about?
So I thought this would make for a good topic. I listened to your guys' discussion about DLC last week, and I thought a good almost companion piece to that would be talking about early access, more common for PC games than console games. Does it even exist on console games, early access?
Not yet, but it's something that's probably going to happen.
Okay, so early access on PC games, its virtues and vices, and the controversy surrounding it as a business model.
Okay. So, early access to... I will be the layman, because I am. I'm not a PC gamer dude, pretty much by any means. After Doom, I tapped out. Excuse me, no, Duke Nukem 3D. I went to Duke Nukem 3D.
Is that 96?
That's where. Well, really, I got priced out of computers. But anyway, I know that early access is basically something where it's on Steam. Maybe it's on other platforms, but I know it from Steam. And it's like a game that's in like an alpha stage or an incomplete stage. People who have given money to quote unquote buy whatever it is, like they are able to play this game in an unfinished state, and that's like a part of their privilege as a purchaser of whatever the software is. Is that more or less?
Yeah, it's usually invitation. It's usually done by some sort of invitation scheme. A lot of times it'll be people who've already pre-ordered the game will get to play it for an open session or a series of open sessions before the final build of the game.
Okay. But sometimes the invitation is give us money and you get an invitation to play the game.
Right.
So, and actually, it seems more commonly that's actually the
case. Okay.
Yeah, like you want to play this game now, fine, pay us for it, and then you can play it now, and then you can just keep playing additional builds that we get until the game is actually released.
Right.
All right, so the reason I wanted to bring this up is because it has engendered a lot of discussion and I would say controversy in the community. And I only know this anecdotally. I don't know any scientific polling that's been done, but I think more people are against it than are for it, or at least the people who are against it seem to be louder, particularly on social media. See a lot of criticism for it. I think a lot of the criticism is unwarranted. Some of it's fair, but
I really only know of early access because of the criticism. Otherwise, it would never even enter into the sphere that I give a shit about when it comes to the video game industry.
So I want to start. I don't want to bury the lead here, but my personal opinion is that as a business model, it's fine. I err towards it being actually good for gaming, but there are certainly, it's a flawed system, I would say. But I want to start with the flaws, if I could, and then sort of work our way to we'll start with the vices and then work to the virtues.
We'll go glass half full to hopefully glass half empty.
Actually, the reverse of that.
Shut up!
So, the first criticism of it is actually not the criticism I hear most, but I think it's a fair criticism, and that is that when you buy an early access game, you have the potential to make a really bad first impression because you're buying a game that is, by definition, incomplete.
Right.
And so, from the developer perspective, you're essentially telling your customer base, like, hey, this is not done yet, but if you just want to look at it and give us money, here you go. And depending on the completeness of it or the intentions of the developer, you could be seeing a game that's essentially broken, and you might be thinking, well, okay, yeah, I agreed to pay some money to get early access to a game. What I didn't agree to do was pay money to play this broken, clunky piece of crap that you can't actually do anything with. So
I would think just from the core concept of what early access is, me as a consumer would be concerned about paying my money for this thing and then it being in perpetual early access, where I don't ever really get
the final
build. Right.
Right.
Because at any time they could stop working on their game and they've already got my money, so who gives a shit?
Right. So I'm glad you brought that up because that's my second point.
Oh,
so,
segue.
Very, very good. And anticipating the arguments. There's the potential for bad investments. You pay money and the developer, let's say the developer, even if the developer has good intentions, maybe the early access just doesn't sell that well, and then they stop development because they just can't afford it anymore. Now you've paid money for a game that doesn't work, and you're not even going to see it in its finished state because the developer goes bankrupt. similarly, but on the opposite side of that, in terms of the bad investment part of it, is what you said, where you pay money for a game and then it's just in early access stage for 10 years because the developer, maybe they've gotten too much money and now they're just kind of milking it, and they don't have any accountability for the product itself, because after all, it's early access, right? So it's not a finished game.
Yeah, exactly.
We're still working on it, but you never actually get to see the final product because they just spend eternity developing it. So you can have problems at both ends of the development spectrum.
Are there examples of where both those
Yes.
both those scenarios have happened?
I think the example of it's not the best example of the first iteration where the game doesn't do that well and then eventually peters out, but it's probably the most famous example for your audience is the Peter Molyneux game, Goddess, where that game was placed into early access, and you were supposed to be able to buy it. It was going to be this. I think he actually championed it as like the spiritual successor to Populous.
Yeah,
it was supposed to have elements of that, and then the game just sucked. I mean, it was just a bad game, and I think, if I remember right, there was supposed to be a multiplayer component to it, and they never actually finished the multiplayer. And if you bought the early access, you would get the multiplayer for free, but then they didn't do that, and then they actually created an entirely different game.
So you're telling me that Peter Molyneux overpromised and underdelivered a product?
So, and this is interesting because I want to say this in defense of early access a little bit. If you were one of the people who paid money for Goddess and Goddess sucked, and you did not get your money's worth on that game, and Peter Molyneux let you down, that does suck. But it's not consequence free. Peter Molyneux, for a long time in the 90s and into the early 2000s, was one of the most revered and admired designers in gaming.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, Populous obviously, but Black and White did pretty well. And then the Fable games, he overpromised on those games, but they
famously,
but they were still good enough games that his reputation.
Well, for the lead up to the original Fable, like he probably had never had a higher cachet in his career.
That's
like he was considered like he was like the crown jewel of what Microsoft had from a development standpoint.
He developed the movies, like a movie simulator game. I forgot what it was called.
I remember Milo. That was really weird for the Kinect. Or it was like a talking to a fifth grade boy simulator. Very weird shit.
So now, anyone who has come to know Peter Molyneux's name in the last 3 years knows him as a joke and basically the laughingstock of the gaming industry. Rock Paper Shotgun sort of infamously humiliated him. Correctly, I think, in an interview over that game and some other things that had happened. So, although the point I'm trying to make here is that although you can have a bad result with early access, at least in that example, it wasn't without consequence. Peter Molyneux, once the Steven Spielberg of game designers, or one of them, is now kind of a laughingstock in the gaming industry, in large part. Not entirely, but in large part because of failures like Goddess. The other example I wanted to bring up, which is actually very topical right now, is Star Citizen.
Yes.
And this is sort of the other end of the spectrum, where they got so much funding, and I looked it up today in preparation of this, and they're up to, I cannot believe this is the number, $140 million freaking dollars.
Oh, man. Well, there's a bunch of these fucking rubes, these marks, who gave, like, as a part of their Kickstarter fund, like multi-$1,000 like investments to get, from what I understand, just like little in-game ships and things like that.
So here's the thing about that. When they did their Kickstarter was wildly successful, but it finished at $2 million. Mm-hmm. They now have $140 million of funding. And then Kickstarter, when you do a successful Kickstarter gets a third of whatever you fund.
Yeah. So
they sort of cut out the middleman after the Kickstarter, just allowed the crowdfunding to be done directly through the Star Citizen website. And they've made $139 million off that, and they don't have to give any of that to Kickstarter. And the bundles now, again, this is true, there's a $15,000 bundle that you pay them $15,000 and you get basically everything that they've made from the start of the game until now. And people do it. It's like, oh, $15,000, sure. And now I've got all this stuff for this game that's in early access and will be for the next 5 years.
Well, think about how many movie tickets that would buy.
So that's the opposite problem, where as a developer, you get overfunded, maybe you get starry eyes, and you start thinking, well, now we've got this money, we can add all these features, we don't have to keep to a hard timeline because we could just we've got enough money to keep the studio alive for 10 years, and you have a infinitely developed product that just exists basically in perpetuity,
right?
And that's never actually finished. And if Star Citizen has very passionate defenders on the internet, but what I would say to them is, even if you believe that there is a game that's going to be created and in the next 5 years we see, it should not be controversial to say that that game cannot live up to either the initial hype or a reasonable expectation for a timeline of development timeline for that game, given what its initial goals were and given how much money it's made. We are now 4 years past the end of the Kickstarter, and there's no finished product in sight, and it's going to be probably another 3 years. So you're talking about a 7-year development cycle to create a finished product for that game, and you cannot convince me that the elongated nature of that development cycle was not directly related to all the money that they've gotten.
Yeah, no, it's a money siphon. That's all it is.
So, but then going to the question about whether or not early access is good for the industry or not, just going through both explanations, it sounds like on one side of the spectrum the developers lose, on the other side of the spectrum the consumer loses. So doesn't in cutting out the risk of early access and cutting out like the pocket gouging of early access, wouldn't it be best for the industry to just skip it altogether?
Well, no, not necessarily, because the other side of that is if you have a competent developer, by giving that developer additional revenue through an early access system, particularly if they're going without a publisher, you can give them the development time that they need to add features to the game that either might be cut without that revenue, or that they might have to go to a publisher to get the revenue for, and then let the publisher kind of call the shots on their development.
Right.
Or if they already have a publisher, maybe the publisher wants to cut things that they don't want to actually cut out. So if you have a developer that knows what they're doing, the additional revenue can be a real boon to the company. The problem is, and the Double Fine adventure is like another example of this, the developers just get overfunded, the successful ones, and then they're like, oh, now we can add all this stuff, and then they just you have feature creep, and then you've just lost it. So they lose sight of the scope of the
Mighty
project.
Number 9 too, like that was another really successful one. And
yes.
But instead of adding a bunch of crap to their game, they took their money and ported it to every gaming platform that you can think of.
Yeah.
And because of that, they were overworked in that regard, and there is no good version of that game.
Yeah, that's right. And so, publishers kind of take a bad rap, but, if a publisher is doing its job right, it can properly tell a developer, hey, you need to cut this feature out, so that we can ship a product that makes sense and the scope is realistic.
Yeah.
And you can lose a sense of that when your publisher is essentially the, as you put them, marks,
right,
who have just written $15,000 checks to you to fund your business.
Like, from that aspect, with Star Citizen in particular, like I haven't really been following it. I know what it is, but the only thing that I know of is all of this stuff. What appears to be very Carney-esque money grifting scheme that they have going on. Because you have all these people who are willing to spend this much money because they have so much passion for that project and what that project represents, which is like a really once popular genre of game, particularly on PC market, which has been starved for any sort of development attention. So to them, Star Citizen is like their messiah. So they're giving them $15,000 at a shot. So now if I'm them and I'm a business, and I'm getting all this money from these people, like I'm gonna go after it. I'm gonna get it.
Yeah, of course.
But once you ship a final product, that unless which they could obviously do, is continue to get your money via a DLC route. But this other avenue gets shut down because now the game is shipped and ostensibly it's over.
Well, yeah, what they've done with Star Citizen in particular is they've almost turned it into like an MMO model, where it's not quite a subscription fee, but it seems like you've got a development cycle that, again, is in perpetuity. And it's like you've got this $100 million sitting in your bank account, you need to do something with it.
Right.
So we might as well just develop, and we'll make the biggest game ever. I don't ascribe bad faith or bad intentions to the developers. I think their goal really is to make the grandest game that they can possibly make. I think the problem, though, is that when you overreach that way and when you don't have the resources, and this was a small startup startup when this whole thing went down. You just you can't handle the tidal wave of scope and ambition that you eventually get, and all the money and the expectations that come with that money that have sort of befallen you. So when I was looking it up, there's like 5 studios and like 400 people working on Star Citizen right now.
Jesus.
And they don't, they still don't have like one sort of put together beta build of everything. They have almost like modules that they've created, and each one is separate.
Or
Here's the combat.
they haven't gone gold.
Well, I will just say, if I gave that company $100 million to develop a game, I'd be pretty pissed off with the development progress after 4 years.
Right.
And
let alone 7.
Right. To each individual donor who's given them $40, and they've got this cute little hangar module that they can kind of fly around in like a space sim. Maybe it's not that big of a deal, but I think collectively they've been a very inefficient operation. I think that's putting it charitably.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It seems like there's obviously people who are willing, and
so the reason why I'm not a big fan of early access, and I see there's a lot of reasons to do it, right? Not just testing builds and making sure that things operate smoothly, or that take in the final development cycles of a game, take it in a different direction maybe than like you were thinking about going, or whatever. There's a lot of different things you can take from a early access, from early access,
right?
And then there's also things like testing servers, make sure your servers are functioning so it can handle different.
There's obviously
users
got to be some sort of
users.
Like an alpha test.
There's a lot of reasons to do that. The reason why I'm not a big fan of early access is I really see it as consumer conditioning. So like in a lot of these games that sort of get either hyped up from Kickstarter events, or they're EA games, that are just big brand name games that they give early access to, or let people pay to do it. Like Battlefield 1 that just came out had an early access period. But like for me, it's kind of like they're sort of making that normal and making the consumer base pay for that, and sort of conditioning them into
like
that.
This is how you get a game now,
because they're excited about it, right? And then they're making you buy the game in the case of Battlefield 1, and then they're making you buy DLC, and you're kind of getting conditioned that you're just going to be spending money on this experience,
right?
And this goes back to kind of what I said about DLCs, because it brings you into it's a really easy transition to make, and which goes to kind of what I was saying about DLCs is that you're paying for the same experience over and over. There's not a whole lot, in my opinion, added to the game after that.
Right.
That couldn't have been part of the original package or the original buy-in. And so they're monetizing the amount of hours a user puts into a game, but ultimately that user is just manipulating the same program over and over and over again. A lot of the game at that point has already been created.
Well, I think
so should the consumer be paying upwards of $100 a year like on a game?
I mean, the key issue is transparency and good faith. It's okay to offer early access to a consumer if you have a sort of a limited set of goals that you hope to achieve from the early access. And the obvious virtues, we transition into that, I guess, of early access are you get people telling you what's good about the game, what's bad about the game. That generally helps development. And you're getting it at an earlier point. Everybody does beta builds, but now you're getting it like pre-alpha, where the development is early enough that you can make major systems changes to a game if you need to.
Right.
And maybe as importantly, your consumers will tell you what's sort of good about the game and what isn't, and then what you need to prioritize in terms of the next steps and next stages of your development. And sometimes it'll be things that you weren't thinking of. A particular module that was maybe a secondary module ends up being really cool, and then it becomes like a primary module.
I would be concerned from a product quality standpoint when you take too much feedback from your base, your audience, because then it becomes almost like
it ends up looking like every other game.
Well, there's too many. There's
the cooks in the kitchen.
Exactly. Too many cooks in the kitchen, and by and large,
lose your vision.
Right, you lose your vision, and by and large, like when a large amount of people get together, like generally all of those ideas are going to be trolled. I mean, there's a lot of margin of error there.
So, and this is, as a developer, man, you gotta and you have to be able to navigate that. So, if you look at the good examples of early access successes, I think the probably the quintessential example of an early access success is Minecraft.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Minecraft, I mean, I can remember 8 years ago buying that game, and there was like some gameplay associated with it. You're trying to fight off zombies or whatever it is, but everybody very quickly was just like, "Hey, it's awesome to build houses and look at all the stuff you could do."
Yeah,
and then
it became a creative suite.
Yeah,
very quickly.
That's what it became.
Yeah.
So Minecraft is an example of early access showing a really fun area of development, and then the actual company's development sort of kind of taking that and running with it. It
goes from early access to being bought by Microsoft for billions of dollars.
Yeah. Now some nerd has he's like the largest property owner in Malibu or something.
Yeah.
Because of that. Counter-Strike is another pretty good example. They didn't call it early access back in the day, but you would get it as a mod. Now Valve charges for it.
Counter-Strike, the original wave of Counter-Strike, all that was just a fan-made mod for Half-Life, right?
Yep. And then those guys got hired by Valve, and then Valve bought the license and started releasing it. But Counter-Strike it's sort of a crude form, but I mean, because it came out in like 1999 or something like that.
Yeah. But it didn't become a monetized thing until it was all wrapped up and
Valve,
right?
Until it became super popular, right? It was a mod that got crazy popular, so popular enough that Valve, basically contacted the mod makers.
It's the exact same story as Dota.
Exact same story as Dota. Yeah. And then more recently, games like Don't Starve and Invisible Ink, which is a sort of a turn-based. I can't.
So both of those games are I haven't played either one, but both of those are on console now.
Oh, they're on console now?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, they both start off as early access Steam games.
Okay.
And early access had a pretty positive impact on both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wrote this down just for you and me. Even though it's an MMO, and so technically it doesn't count, but I would submit to you that EVE Online
yes,
is absolutely an example of early access because Mr. Brian here next to me and I both played that game in its beta state and its release state, and it was absolute garbage.
Yep.
One of the worst MMOs to have ever come out.
That was my one and only foray into, with the exception of dabbling in Phantasy Star Online for Dreamcast. Right. EVE Online was the first time I ever tried to play an MMO, and talk about entering into a world that you do not belong.
And I know that EVE Online has become like a big MMO game now. It's of course
EVE Online is a fascinating fucking thing now.
It's
crazy.
The little MMO that could.
Yes.
And they just stayed alive and developed and
now there are monuments in Iceland because of this game. So that's legit real world monuments.
I would say EVE Online's released game was basically an early access game.
Right.
That through their subscription fees they were able to keep developing.
Yes, that's totally true. I didn't even think of that.
So the point here was transparency is a big deal with early access. You want your consumers to know what they're buying, and ideally what they're not buying, what the bugs are, what they aren't.
Right.
And I would think that what you should do is say, look, we think there's another year of development here, something like that. These are the features that we're going to be implementing. They're not there yet. And just be upfront with what your game is and what it isn't. I think developers are acting in bad faith when there's a development cycle that exists into perpetuity, or when they have features that they are just sort of continually adding to the game as they continue to get money, or the opposite, they're not getting a lot of money, and then it's like the goddess thing, and development is slowing to a crawl. Now they're not updating, and they're kind of being shifty about what they're talking about. So the competency of the developer is a big deal. The transparency of the developer is a big deal. And I think, moreover, this can be said about just about anything, I guess, but the developer needs to be acting in good faith. You're asking people to give you money for a game that's not done. So you owe it to them to say exactly what is going to be done, when it's going to be done.
Right.
And
I don't go to Denny's and order a moons over my hammy without getting my moons over my hammy.
That's right.
It's as simple as that.
So, and then one interesting thing that I thought is like an example was No Man's Sky, which is of course has created basically a plague across Steam and for all PC and console users. I was thinking, man, what if that game had an early access?
The game didn't have an early access?
Well, what if the release was, instead of them calling it a release and feeling like it should be a release, what if that was done as an early access?
I mean, I should be clear up front before
because they've made patches since then that has added tons of more content.
They made a patch that added a bunch of content to the game, but the biggest problem with that game was the CEO overpromising parts of the game and what the game would be. But if there was an early access where people could get in, they would have seen what the game is, and the hype would have been reduced. Now, I'm not trying to exonerate the CEO for what he did. He's responsible for.
Well, Sony also. I think that Sony also had a hand in letting that wildfire kind of get out of control, because they definitely positioned that game so forward facing with all of their promotional stuff.
I'm sure they were ecstatic with the marketing. That guy was on Stephen Colbert's show talking about how it's going to be the end all be all.
Right, like this is the only game you'll ever need.
Yeah, and I was like, how many people are at this developer? 20? You
right.
know, like, what? Are you kidding me? Like, there's no way this can deliver what he says it's going to deliver.
Right.
He owns that. He's responsible for that. That being said, maybe there's a whole bunch of people out there that would have saved money if there was an early access where some poor sacrificial lambs paid to play the game, and then the word got out that, hey man, this isn't what Stephen Colbert has lied to you, everyone. Yeah. Like, this is not what's being made out to be. And then more realistic expectations could have existed for the game. So I think that's an example of where maybe early access would have served a game well. Maybe if not served the game well, at least served the community well. There'd probably be 1 million people out there who didn't buy the game if they had only seen what it looks like through the early access system. Right. So that's kind of an interesting what might have been.
Well, it's definitely something that people, I think are very passionate. Either well, it's not too much in for. It's a whole lot of passion in the against category with early access, I feel.
Yeah, you're right about that. Let me make one last point about all the anti-early accessors. If you're going to be against early access, do not be against early access as a business model. Be against the execution of early access in examples like the Goddess example, and at the opposite end of the spectrum, the Star Citizen model, because there are positive examples of early access. We talked about some of those on this podcast, and it's not inherently bad. It just, you have to be transparent about what you're doing, and you have to kind of rein in your own ambitions a little bit to make sure you can deliver on that thing that you're making the promise for to actually get the revenue.
Right.
It's not unlike Kickstarter. It's not unlike DLC. It's your responsibility as the developer to bring a value to the product.
Right.
So it's not that early access is bad, and broad-based criticisms against early access as a business model, I think, are flawed. You just, you take each example as it exists and you say, hey, Minecraft, early access worked really well there. Goddess, early access was a disaster there. And you just take it case by case.
Well, but in defense of people who aren't fans of early access or DLC, it comes down to, and I would put myself more in that category, it comes down, in my opinion, to the value of the game and how much a consumer should pay for that experience.
Yeah.
And I just think that experience is so repetitious by nature that I don't think you can look at how much time somebody spends in a game and monetize it like that, because in my opinion, you look at the amount of content that's ultimately produced for a game and what the monetary value should be for that entirety of the content.
Yeah.
And we're getting to the point now where games are well over $100 for all the content that you're going to get.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, the consumer has the ultimate decision-making power. Like, you can buy the things that you want to buy in whatever state you see it, and if these things piss you off, then don't buy these products.
Right.
And if there's enough of you that are pissed off by it, then maybe the business
Wait,
will change.
What do you think Peter Molyneux's next game is going to sell? How do you think it's going to sell? It's not going to sell.
Right.
It's not, because everybody is so gun shy now.
Yeah.
Because of this disaster with Goddess and all this other stuff.
And don't get me wrong. I think the business model is smart and works, and I think it's proving to work, and I think it'll become the norm.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that I'm not really happy about it, because I think that because the business model is so effective, people that are doing that right now are going to be making the most money. Everyone's going to be moving towards that, and I think personally it just continues a trend where really creative and really innovative games are more and more few and far between. You can make an argument for the indie scene, but those are folks just trying to like live the dream.
Yeah.
I think some of the best developers are in it to make money, right? And they're going to be following this model on big brand name games as opposed to, maybe doing something really, really creative or having like a Sega and Nintendo of yesteryear, just say like, hey, you're a talented, or how Atari used to do, or any other, name it. Hey, you're a talented developer, programmer.
Go make the thing you want to make.
Just go make what you want to make.
Yeah.
What if? I don't know if we're getting long, but I want to ask you guys this one question. What if Gabe Newell came out tomorrow and he said, okay, we're going to release an early access for Half-Life 3. We think we've still got about 1.5 years of development left on it, but you'll be able to play, say, the first 2 scenes of the game,
right?
And it's buggy. We got to polish these textures, but here's what it is. We want to know if you guys feel the pacing is okay. Do you think that would be a moral or immoral thing for Valve to do?
Well, are they charging money?
Yes, you have to pay $20 for that, but then you can apply that as like a credit to the full Half-Life game.
I guess I would lean more into the amoral side because like there's a lot of cachet behind that brand. There's a lot of people clamoring for that thing to happen. And it'd be a very, very fast way for them to get a ton of money, which they don't need because they're fucking Valve. And they run the PC market.
Okay.
So yeah, I would see it as a way to bleed the fans.
So immoral, but because they don't need it.
Exactly. Because it's completely unnecessary. And also too, your example is Half-Life 3. Like I would as someone who wants to play that, I would much rather be kept in the dark for as long as possible until it's at a state where like this is their vision and their directed piece, and
right.
I want to go full into what they want to offer me.
Well, and under that scenario, and really any scenario, I think it's totally acceptable and okay for all the positive reasons about early access you mentioned to make a down payment basically of $20 or whatever on the game and have that as a credit towards me purchasing the game.
Yeah.
Or not purchasing the game at all, right? So that like
are you saying like the flexibility with like you give your $20, this isn't what you signed up for, I want to take my $20 back? Like is that what you're saying?
No, I'm okay with somebody playing $20 based on how much or whatever monetary value of what they're actually going to get to play, right?
Oh, okay.
Right. Like if you get 1/3 of the game for early access, you pay 1/3 of the retail price.
Right.
And then when the full game gets released, you pay the other $40 or something.
Yeah, because in theory, I love the concept of DLC. I love the concept of early access. I think that there's a lot of positive things to say about both things.
Yeah. Your issues are with the execution.
Well, no, my issues is the monetary value of the experience that you're paying. I just think that it's getting to the point in a lot of games, especially a lot of games that I love. Total War was an example that I used, and Battlefront's another one, where I just think the buy-in's too much. Yeah. I didn't pay for the buy-in because I thought it was too much.
Right.
And I can see it being normal, and it's getting to the point where it's like, I'm not comfortable buying all the content I want to buy in Total War because I don't think that they need to get all that money from me for me to experience it. I think that it's too much, right?
Well, sure, but if I love that. I'm gonna be this capitalist CEO.
Yeah.
At this next point.
Yeah.
But surely, if enough consumers take your position, if you're representative of a key demographic,
and I'm just saying, I have no faith that anyone will take that position.
Everyone's just like, let me give you money.
Well, because then it goes back to the
money.
It goes back to the conditioning. Like I think this has been a slow process that is just like started to happen, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. It could eventually lead to a bubble, right? It could eventually lead to people finding entertainment elsewhere.
Yeah.
It's happened before. So and maybe not, and maybe it just becomes a normal thing, and that's what it's due. And I think if that happens and it becomes more expensive to pay for the experience of that game, whatever it is, you're gonna get to a point where and it happens this way now, is like people have their one game that they play 80% of all the time that they're playing video games. Yeah. And that's it, and that's just what they play. And so it's harder to innovate because it's harder to introduce people, it's hard to get mind share from people. And I just think that it ultimately will hurt one of the aspects of video games I love the most, which is storytelling and creative storytelling.
Yeah,
and
it's
creative experiences.
It's the commercial side being embraced more because that's what these are. These are businesses.
And I have no faith that it won't happen.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of bitching about it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely I think here to stay though. That's for sure. But
yeah.
Hopefully it is relegated to the cesspool that is PC gaming. I will say it. I will say it.
This podcast took a dark turn all of a sudden. This is not what I signed up for.
I am taking a stand. Unless it's a Tandy, I'm out. All right. Well, yeah, we've probably gone on too long, but I think we've had a good conversation about a hot button issue in a very first world problem. All right. So with that, signing off, and thanks for listening.